My name is Stella Harper, 34 years old, and I always believed family meant unconditional support. Growing up, while my father showered my younger sister Amanda with endless affection and opportunities, my grandfather became my emotional anchor. What nobody expected was how dramatically everything would change at the reading of Grandpa Harold's will. The family dynamic that had been set in stone for decades shattered in an instant. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and join me as I reveal how a hidden truth turned my world upside down. I grew up in Brookline, an affluent suburb just outside Boston, with my sister Amanda, who is 2 years younger than me. Our childhood home was a grand Victorian with a sprawling backyard where Amanda would host elaborate tea parties with friends, while I often sat alone reading books from my grandfather's extensive library. My father, Richard Harper, built his reputation as one of Boston's most successful investment bankers. He worked long hours but somehow always found time to attend Amanda's dance recitals and school plays. His face would light up with pride whenever Amanda entered the room, his affection for her obvious to anyone watching. For me, his interactions were brief, practical conversations about academic performance or future plans. There was never the same warmth or enthusiasm. "Stella, you're smart enough to figure things out on your own," became his standard response whenever I needed anything. Meanwhile, Amanda received guidance, support, and an open checkbook. Our mother, Grace, balanced the family dynamic while she was alive. I still remember how she would make special time for me when Dad was busy fawning over Amanda. We would bake cookies together or visit museums on Saturday mornings. She understood me in ways no one else did. But then cancer took her when I was 12 and Amanda was 10, leaving a gaping hole in our family that fundamentally changed everything. After Mom died, Dad became even more protective of Amanda. It was as if he channeled all his grief and love into ensuring Amanda never felt the loss too deeply. He bought her new clothes, took her on special trips, and consulted her on decisions about the house. I was expected to be strong, practical, and independent. "You're the responsible one, Stella," he would say, as if that justified giving me less attention and support. That's when Grandpa Harold, my father's father, stepped into my life in a more significant way. He lived in the carriage house on our property, having moved there after Grandma passed a few years before Mom. Grandpa noticed how isolated I'd become and made it his mission to ensure I felt valued. "Your father means well, Stella," Grandpa would tell me during our afternoon walks through the garden. "But some people don't know how to divide their hearts equally." Grandpa and I shared a love of art, literature, and antiques. He had been a history professor before retiring, and his knowledge seemed limitless. While Dad took Amanda shopping, Grandpa took me to auctions and antique stores, teaching me how to recognize quality craftsmanship and authentic pieces. We spent hours in his study, examining his collection of rare books and artifacts, each with a story he enthusiastically shared. True wealth is in understanding the value of things, not just their price. He would say, a lesson that shaped my future career path. Amanda knew exactly how to get whatever she wanted from our father. She would tilt her head slightly, widen her blue eyes, and speak in that soft voice that somehow made her requests sound like the most reasonable things in the world. Dad never stood a chance against her charm offensive. When she wanted a new phone because everyone at school had one, she got the latest model the next day. When I needed a new laptop for school projects, Dad suggested I save up from my part-time job at the library. I developed a different personality than my sister. Where she was outgoing and dramatic, I became practical and self-contained. I stopped asking for things after being denied too many times. I worked hard in school, got scholarships, and took pride in my independence. I refused to beg for attention or validation that never seemed to come naturally from my father. The contrast between how Dad treated us became painfully obvious during milestone events. When Amanda got her driver's license after failing the test twice, Dad surprised her with a brand new Audi. "You need to be safe on the road, Princess," he explained. When I passed on my first try with a perfect score, I continued taking the bus or borrowing Grandpa's old Volvo when he wasn't using it. For my high school graduation, where I was valedictorian, Dad gave me a card with $100. For Amanda's graduation, where she barely maintained a B average, he threw an extravagant party and presented her with a diamond necklace that had belonged to our mother. "Amanda reminds me so much of your mother," he said when I later questioned the disparity. "She needs more encouragement to find her way." Grandpa witnessed these moments with a furrowed brow and tight lips. After particularly egregious displays of favoritism, he would find me and say, "Remember, Stella, integrity and self-reliance will take you further than any handout. I see your worth even when others miss it." Throughout those difficult teenage years, Grandpa became my emotional anchor. When college application season arrived, he spent hours helping me perfect my essays, while Dad hired a private counselor for Amanda. When I received a scholarship to study art history at Boston University, Grandpa was the one who took me out to celebrate. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming," he told me that night, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You have her strength and her eye for beauty." Those words sustained me through years of feeling like the forgotten daughter, the one who existed in the shadow of my sister's spotlight. Grandpa taught me that being overlooked didn't mean being less valuable. He instilled in me a quiet confidence that would eventually see me through the storm that was coming. By the time I reached 34, I had built a life for myself that reflected my values and passions. I worked as an art conservator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, a position I had earned through years of dedicated study and apprenticeships. My days were spent carefully restoring paintings and artifacts, preserving history with skilled hands that Grandpa had always said were meant for delicate work. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge that I had saved for years to afford. It wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with carefully selected furniture and art pieces I had collected over time. Each item had a story, just as Grandpa had taught me to appreciate. My salary covered my expenses, and I took pride in standing on my own feet financially, never asking my father for assistance. Amanda, now 32, presented a stark contrast to my steady lifestyle. She had bounced between jobs in fashion retail event planning and interior design, never sticking with anything longer than a year. Her resume was spotty, but it hardly mattered since our father ensured she maintained a lavish lifestyle regardless of her employment status. While I saved for years to afford my small apartment, Amanda lived in a luxury condo in Back Bay that Dad had purchased as an investment property, but given to her to use indefinitely. Her closet was filled with designer clothes, her vacations were frequent and exotic, and her social media showcased a life of privilege that came not from her own efforts, but from our father's generosity. "Networking is work too, Stella," she would say defensively whenever I asked about her latest career pivot. "Dad understands that maintaining the right image and connections is important in today's world." I had been dating David Powell for nearly 2 years when Grandpa's health began to decline. David was a literature professor at Emerson College, kind and thoughtful in ways that reminded me of Grandpa. He understood my complicated family dynamics and provided the emotional support I had always lacked from my father. David valued my independence while still being a true partner, something I hadn't realized was possible in a relationship until meeting him. Family gatherings had become increasingly tense affairs as we entered our 30s. Amanda would inevitably dominate conversations, speaking loudly about her latest adventures or acquisitions while subtly diminishing my achievements. If I mentioned a successful restoration project, she would cut in with, "That's nice, Stella. Speaking of art, you wouldn't believe the gallery opening I attended last week. The artist is a personal friend, very exclusive." Dad would beam at Amanda's stories while barely acknowledging mine. When I received a prestigious grant for my conservation work, his response was, "That's good, Stella. You've always been self-sufficient." The same week, he praised Amanda endlessly for organizing a charity luncheon, something she did using his connections and money. Grandpa would watch these interactions with an unreadable expression, occasionally catching my eye across the room with a subtle nod that said, "I see what's happening here." As his health deteriorated, he became more vocal about the imbalance. "Richard," he said firmly at one Sunday dinner, after Dad had brushed off news of my promotion, "your daughter has just been recognized as one of the top conservators in New England. Perhaps that deserves more than a passing acknowledgement." Dad looked startled, then slightly embarrassed. "Of course that's wonderful, Stella. I just assumed you didn't need the validation. You've always been so independent." Amanda quickly redirected the conversation to her plans to redecorate her condo, and Dad eagerly engaged, offering to connect her with designers he knew. The moment of potential recognition had passed. In the last year of Grandpa's life, our bond grew even stronger. I visited him daily as he became increasingly confined to his home. We would sit in his study surrounded by his beloved books and antiques, talking about art history and occasionally family dynamics. "Your father has always struggled to see beyond the surface," Grandpa told me during one of our talks. "He sees Amanda's need for approval and mistakes it for depth of character. He sees your strength and mistakes it for emotional distance. Neither perception is accurate, but perception becomes reality when we allow it." I noticed that Grandpa was having increasingly frequent meetings with his attorney, James Wilson. Sometimes I would arrive to find them in deep conversation papers spread across Grandpa's desk, their discussion stopping abruptly when I entered the room. "Just boring legal matters, my dear," Grandpa would say, exchanging significant glances with Mr. Wilson. "Nothing for you to worry about just yet." As his health declined more rapidly, Grandpa became more cryptic in our conversations. "Truth finds its way to light eventually, Stella," he said, holding my hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Just like cream rising to the top. What's genuine and pure cannot stay hidden forever." The night before Grandpa passed away, he gave me an old leather-bound book of poetry he had always treasured. "Your grandmother gave this to me when we were young," he said. "Read it when you need guidance. The answers you seek might be closer than you think." When Grandpa died peacefully in his sleep, I felt as though the last person who truly saw and valued me had left this world. At the funeral, Amanda wept dramatically, clinging to our father's arm, while I stood composed but devastated, my grief too profound for public display. David stood beside me, a quiet pillar of support, as I watched my sister perform grief she barely felt for a grandfather she had rarely visited. Dad immediately took control of the funeral arrangements, ignoring my input, despite my close relationship with Grandpa. "I know what my father would have wanted," he said dismissively when I suggested a selection of classical music Grandpa had loved. Instead, the service featured readings and music that reflected Dad's preferences rather than Grandpa's. Throughout the ceremony, I clutched the poetry book Grandpa had given me, drawing comfort from this last connection to him. I didn't know then how significant that book would become, or that Grandpa's cryptic statements about truth coming to light were about to manifest in ways none of us could have predicted. 1 month after we laid Grandpa to rest, Mr. Wilson, his attorney, called to inform us that the formal reading of the will would take place the following week. Harold was very specific about the timing, he explained in his measured professional tone. He requested that the family have proper time to grieve before addressing matters of inheritance. That evening, Dad called a family meeting in his study, the room that had always symbolized his authority in our home. "I wanted to discuss expectations before we meet with James," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "My father was traditional in his values, and I anticipate that his estate will pass primarily to me as his son. Of course, I intend to be generous with both of you girls." Amanda perched on the arm of his chair, nodding along. "Daddy, I was thinking that I might take over Grandpa's vacation house in Vermont. You never use it, and it would be perfect for weekend retreats with friends." Dad patted her hand affectionately. "That seems reasonable, Princess. We'll see what the will states formally, but I'm sure we can arrange something along those lines." I sat across from them, feeling like an outsider witnessing a private conversation. "Grandpa had a valuable collection of first-edition books and antiques," I mentioned. "I'd appreciate if those items could be considered separately. He and I shared that interest." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Those items have been in the family for generations, Stella. They should stay in the main house where they belong." His tone made it clear that the main house would remain under his control, not mine. Amanda shot me a look of false sympathy. "Don't worry, Stella. You can come visit the books anytime you want." Her condescension was thinly veiled, assuming that Dad's prediction about the inheritance was a foregone conclusion. That night, I sat in my apartment, leafing through Grandpa's poetry book, seeking comfort in his favorite verses. As I turned the pages, a small brass key fell into my lap. I had never seen it before, ornate and clearly old. It didn't match any lock in my apartment. I examined it carefully, wondering if Grandpa had accidentally left it in the book or if it had been placed there intentionally. I decided to keep it close, slipping it onto my keychain next to my apartment and work keys. I fell asleep that night with the poetry book on my nightstand and dreamed vividly of Grandpa leading me down a corridor in his house, pointing to a door I had never noticed before. "The key, Stella," he said in the dream. "Remember what I taught you about value." I woke with a start, the morning light streaming through my blinds, the dream lingering like a message I couldn't quite decipher. The day of the will reading arrived with a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress that I had worn to professional events at the museum, wanting to honor the seriousness of the occasion. David offered to accompany me for moral support, and I gratefully accepted, knowing that having someone firmly in my corner would help me face whatever was coming. We arranged to meet my father and Amanda directly at Mr. Wilson's downtown office. As David and I approached the imposing granite building, I spotted them already waiting outside. Amanda was dressed in what appeared to be a brand-new designer suit, her hair and makeup impeccably done, as if she were attending a society event rather than a will reading. "There's our hard-working sister," Amanda called out with artificial brightness as we approached. "We were just saying how nice it is that you could take time off from the museum. Those dusty old paintings must keep you so busy." Dad checked his watch impatiently. "Let's head inside. James is expecting us at 11 sharp." As we walked through the lobby, I overheard Amanda whispering to our father, "Have you made those arrangements we discussed? We need to make sure everything transitions smoothly." Dad nodded slightly. "It's all taken care of. Don't worry about anything." Their secretive exchange sent a chill through me. What arrangements had they been making? Did they already have plans for Grandpa's estate that didn't include me? David squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Remember what you told me about your grandfather," he said quietly. "He valued your relationship above all else. Whatever happens today with material possessions doesn't change that." I nodded, grateful for his perspective. Grandpa had taught me that integrity and character mattered more than wealth or possessions. I would try to honor his memory by facing this day with the dignity he had always admired. Mr. Wilson's office reflected his personality, methodical, traditional, and somewhat austere. Law books lined the walls, and family photos in silver frames adorned his imposing mahogany desk. He greeted each of us formally, his handshake firm, his expression revealing nothing about what was to come. "Harold was very methodical in his estate planning," he explained as he led us into a conference room. "He made certain revisions and additions over the past few years that he felt were important to his legacy." Amanda and Dad exchanged glances at this comment. I clutched my purse where I had placed Grandpa's book and the mysterious key-drawing strength from these connections to him. Mr. Wilson directed us to specific seats around the polished conference table, following what seemed to be predetermined instructions. I found myself seated directly across from him with David beside me. Dad was positioned at one end of the table with Amanda to his right. "Before we begin," Mr. Wilson said solemnly, "I want to express again my condolences for your loss. Harold was not just a client but a friend of many years. He was a man of principle who cared deeply about his family's future." Dad nodded impatiently. "Yes, thank you, James. We all miss my father, but we're here now to address practical matters." Mr. Wilson's expression remained neutral as he opened an elaborate leather portfolio. "Then let's proceed with the reading of Harold Stephen Harper's last will and testament. Before I begin with the specific bequests," Mr. Wilson stated, adjusting his reading glasses, "I should inform you that Harold's estate is considerably larger than any of you might have anticipated." Dad leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "What exactly do you mean, James?" "Your father was an exceptionally astute investor, Richard. While he lived modestly, his financial acumen was remarkable. The total value of his estate is approximately $28 million, not including real estate holdings and personal property." The room fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. Grandpa had never given any indication of such wealth. He had lived comfortably but frugally in the carriage house, driving the same car for 20 years, wearing the same tweed jackets until they wore thin at the elbows. $28 million, Amanda whispered, her eyes widening. But he lived like he was on a professor's pension. "Harold believed in the value of quiet wealth," Mr. Wilson explained. "Now let me proceed with the specific bequests." The attorney began with minor items, charitable donations to the university, where Grandpa had taught, a collection of rare stamps, to a museum's small financial gifts to his longtime housekeeper and gardener. Then came personal items for extended family members, a pocket watch to a cousin, fishing gear to an old colleague. Each item was described with precision, reflecting Grandpa's attention to detail. Dad began drumming his fingers on the table as the reading continued without mention of the major assets. "Perhaps we could expedite this process, James. I'm sure we all appreciate my father's thoroughness, but there are pressing matters awaiting my attention this afternoon." Mr. Wilson looked up from the document, his expression stern. "I'm following Harold's explicit instructions, Richard. He was quite clear about the order in which these matters should be addressed." He continued reading, mentioning items of increasing value, but still not the bulk of the estate. Amanda received a set of pearl jewelry that had belonged to our grandmother, while I was bequeathed Grandpa's collection of first-edition books, which I had admired since childhood. "Now," Mr. Wilson said, placing the document down, "we come to the matter of the residuary estate, which comprises approximately 90% of Harold's assets." Dad straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie with a self-satisfied expression. Amanda mirrored his confidence, her lips curled in a small smile as she glanced at me with barely disguised pity. "Before I proceed with this section," Mr. Wilson continued, "Harold requested that I play a video message he recorded 6 months before his passing." This announcement clearly surprised my father, a video that wasn't mentioned previously. "It was Harold's express wish that this recording be viewed at this precise moment during the reading," Mr. Wilson explained as he set up a laptop computer. He felt his own words would provide important context for his decisions. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly there was Grandpa seated in his favorite leather chair in his study, looking thin but alert, his eyes sharp with purpose. My throat tightened at seeing him again so alive and present. "Hello, family." Grandpa began, his voice stronger on the recording than it had been in his final weeks. "If you're watching this, I've departed this world, hopefully having left some wisdom behind, along with material possessions." He adjusted his glasses, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. I've always believed that wealth is a responsibility, not simply a privilege. How we distribute our resources says much about our values and our assessment of character. Grandpa leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more intense. "Over the past decade, I've observed the dynamics in our family with increasing concern. Richard, my son, while I love you deeply, I've watched you foster a troubling imbalance in how you treat your daughters." Dad's face flushed red. Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside him. "More disturbingly," Grandpa continued, "I discovered something 5 years ago that forced me to reconsider my estate planning entirely. Richard, when Grace died, she left a trust for both Stella and Amanda intended to provide equally for their education and early adult needs. As trustee, you had a fiduciary duty to administer these funds impartially." The room grew impossibly still. I felt David's hand find mine under the table. "Through careful investigation, I confirmed that you systematically directed the majority of those funds to Amanda, while telling Stella repeatedly that she needed to stand on her own. You used your daughter's inheritance to fund another daughter's lifestyle, all while claiming you were teaching Stella independence." Dad's face had gone from red to ashen. Amanda stared at him in shock, clearly unaware of this revelation. "This breach of trust," Grandpa said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "along with the years of witnessing your favoritism, has led me to my decision regarding my own estate." Grandpa shifted in his chair, sitting straighter. "The remainder of my estate, including my investment portfolio, business holdings, real estate properties, and the family home, will be placed in a trust. Stella will serve as sole trustee and primary beneficiary of this trust." I gasped involuntarily. Amanda's face froze in an expression of disbelief. "Stella has demonstrated the integrity, responsibility, and compassion that I value above all qualities. She will manage these assets not just for her benefit, but for the good of the family legacy I've built." Grandpa paused, looking directly into the camera as if he could see our reactions. "Amanda will receive a monthly stipend from the trust contingent upon maintaining legitimate employment. This stipend will be generous but not excessive, intended to supplement rather than replace earned income." Amanda's carefully composed expression began to crack her lips, trembling with anger or shock or both. "Richard, you will receive my personal effects and the continuation of the modest pension I had already established for you years ago. The family business holdings will transfer entirely to Stella's management." Dad's face had drained completely of color. "James has documentation of all financial improprieties regarding the children's trusts should anyone wish to contest these arrangements." Grandpa added, effectively closing any avenue of legal challenge. His expression softened slightly. "I make these decisions not from spite, but from a desire to correct an injustice and to place family resources in the hands of someone who I believe will steward them with wisdom. Stella, I trust you to be fair and compassionate, even where fairness and compassion were not always extended to you." The video ended, leaving the conference room in profound silence. I sat frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The walls seemed to close in as I tried to comprehend that I had just inherited not only wealth beyond my imagination, but also enormous responsibility. Amanda was the first to break the silence, her composure shattering completely. "This is absurd," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "Grandpa was clearly manipulated. Stella must have poisoned him against us during all those convenient little visits when he was vulnerable and dying." Dad found his voice, though it quavered with barely controlled rage. James, this can't possibly be legally binding. My father was elderly, possibly not in his right mind. We'll contest this immediately." Mr. Wilson remained unruffled by their outbursts. I anticipated this reaction, which is why Harold was extremely thorough. He removed a thick folder from his briefcase. "These are bank records showing the systematic misappropriation of funds from the girls' trust. There are also medical evaluations confirming Harold's mental acuity up until his final days, witnesses to his decision-making process, and multiple versions of the will dating back years showing his evolving concerns." He spread the documents across the table. Each version shows an increasing shift toward protecting Stella's interests as Harold uncovered more evidence of financial misconduct. This was not a hasty deathbed decision, but a carefully considered corrective action developed over years. I finally found my voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "I had no idea about any of this. About Mom's trust, about the extent of Grandpa's wealth, about his plans." Amanda whirled toward me, her face contorted with fury. "Oh, please, you've always played the victim, the overlooked daughter. You must have been working toward this for years, manipulating Grandpa with your pathetic devotion." David stood up, placing himself slightly between Amanda and me. "That's enough. Stella is as shocked by this as anyone. She never knew about any trust from her mother because it was kept from her." Dad slammed his fist on the table. "This is not over, James. I'll have my attorneys review everything. My father was clearly influenced unduly during a vulnerable time." Mr. Wilson gathered his papers calmly. "You're welcome to pursue that course, Richard, though I advise against it. Harold anticipated a challenge and prepared accordingly. Any legal battle would only result in making the details of your financial mismanagement public record, something I imagine you'd prefer to avoid." Dad's jaw clenched as he processed this implicit threat. Amanda grabbed her designer handbag, tears of rage streaming down her face, smearing her perfect makeup. "You'll regret this, Stella," she spat. "You think you can just take everything that should have been ours. This family will never be the same." With that parting shot, Amanda stormed out of the conference room, leaving the door swinging wildly behind her. Dad rose more slowly, straightening his suit jacket with trembling hands, attempting to recover some dignity. "We'll discuss this further," he said coldly, addressing no one in particular, before following Amanda's path out the door. As their footsteps receded down the hallway, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had just happened. The family dynamic of 3 decades had been completely upended in less than an hour. "Are you all right?" David asked gently, his hand on my shoulder. I nodded mechanically, then turned to Mr. Wilson. "Did you know, all this time we've been meeting about Grandpa's condition, did you know what he was planning?" The attorney's professional demeanor softened slightly. I knew Harold was concerned about fairness in the family. The full extent of his plans was confidential, but yes, I helped him gather the necessary documentation and structure the trust. He wanted very much to protect you, Stella. "The key," I said, suddenly reaching into my purse. "He left a key in the poetry book he gave me. Does it mean something, Mr.?" Wilson smiled for the first time. "Yes, it opens a safe deposit box at Boston Federal Bank. Harold left personal letters for you there, explaining things he felt too private to include in the formal will or the video. He wanted you to have his perspective, his reasoning in his own words." I turned the small brass key over in my palm, this physical connection to Grandpa's final message to me. "What happens now?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility that had been placed on my shoulders. "Now," Mr. Wilson said, pulling out another folder, "we begin the process of transferring control of the assets to you as trustee. There's much to learn, but Harold was confident in your ability to manage his legacy wisely, and I'll be here to guide you through the legal aspects." As David and I left the attorney's office later that afternoon, the world looked different somehow. The buildings seemed the same, the streets unchanged, but everything had shifted beneath my feet. I was no longer just Stella Harper Museum conservator and overlooked daughter. I was now the custodian of a fortune and a family legacy, entrusted with a responsibility I had never sought or expected. What I didn't realize then was that the will reading was only the beginning. The real battle for family truth and reconciliation was just getting started, and it would test every value Grandpa had instilled in me over the years. The moment David and I stepped out of the attorney's office building, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Reporters wouldn't be gathered outside as no one knew about the will's contents yet, but I felt exposed nonetheless, as if everyone could see that my life had transformed in the span of an hour. "Let's get you home," David said, gently guiding me toward his car. "You need time to process all this." We had barely driven 2 blocks when my phone began vibrating incessantly with messages from Amanda. I glanced down to see a barrage of accusations and threats. "You manipulative witch, you won't get away with stealing what should have been mine. Daddy is calling his attorneys right now. Prepare to lose everything. Did you really think we wouldn't fight this? You have no idea what's coming for you." I turned off my phone, my hands shaking. "They hate me, David. They actually believe I orchestrated this somehow." "They're in shock," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "And they're used to getting their way. Give them time to realize that your grandfather made these decisions independently." When we arrived at my apartment, Mr. Wilson had already sent a courier with a preliminary folder of documents regarding the trust. Among them was a letter with instructions for accessing the safe deposit box Grandpa had mentioned. "Should we go now?" David asked, checking his watch. "The bank will be open for another few hours." Still feeling numb, I nodded. "I need to understand. Maybe Grandpa's letters will help make sense of all this." At Boston Federal Bank, a solemn manager escorted us to the vault after carefully verifying my identification and the documentation from Mr. Wilson. The brass key slid perfectly into the lock of a large safe deposit box, just as Grandpa must have planned. Inside the box were several sealed envelopes, each labeled with dates spanning the past 5 years. The earliest was marked, "To be read first," in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened this initial letter and began to read. "My dearest Stella," Grandpa wrote, "If you're reading this, then James has executed my wishes as instructed. I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed and perhaps even guilty about the inheritance I've entrusted to you. Please know that this decision was made after years of careful observation and with complete clarity of mind." The letter went on to explain how Grandpa had first become suspicious about the children's trust when he overheard Dad and Amanda discussing her new car while I was still taking public transportation to my internship at the museum. "I requested financial records from the bank where Grace's trust was held," he continued. "What I discovered broke my heart. Richard had systematically directed those funds primarily to Amanda, using various justifications in the documentation, but ultimately betraying both Grace's intentions and his duty as a trustee. Grandpa detailed his quiet investigation over the years, documenting each instance of financial favoritism, keeping meticulous records that would later become the evidence Mr. Wilson mentioned. What troubled me most, Grandpa wrote, was not just the financial impropriety, but the emotional impact of this imbalance. I watched you struggle to pay for your education and establish yourself professionally, all while being told that you needed to be independent. Meanwhile, Amanda was being trained in dependency, never developing the strength of character that comes from earning one's way. The final paragraph of the first letter hit me hardest. I considered confronting Richard directly, but I came to believe that he would never truly recognize the injustice of his actions. Instead, I chose this path, placing you in a position to restore balance, not through revenge, but through wise stewardship. You have both the intelligence and the heart to manage this responsibility, Stella. Trust yourself, as I have trusted you." I looked up at David, tears streaming down my face. He knew for years. He was watching everything, documenting it all. "He wanted to protect you," David said softly, "and clearly he believed in you." When we returned to my apartment that evening, my phone had dozens of missed calls and messages. Dad had called 7 times Amanda 15. There were also voicemails from Mr. Wilson updating me on immediate next steps and offering support. As I was listening to the messages, my phone rang again. It was Dad. "Stella, this has gone far enough," he began without preamble. "You need to meet with me and my attorneys tomorrow to discuss how we're going to fix this situation." "Fix what situation, Dad?" I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Grandpa made his decisions. The documentation speaks for itself." "You can't possibly think you're equipped to handle the family assets," he scoffed. "You work in a museum, for God's sake. You have no business experience." "Grandpa thought differently," I replied. "And according to what I've learned today, you mishandled funds that should have supported both your daughters equally. I'm not sure you're in a position to question anyone's financial judgment." There was a long pause before Dad spoke again, his voice dangerously quiet. "If you pursue this, if you accept what my father proposed in that ridiculous will, you will no longer be welcome in this family. Is that what you want? To destroy everything for money?" The irony of his statement was breathtaking. "Dad, I just learned that Mom left a trust for both Amanda and me. You never told me about it. You used my share to fund Amanda's lifestyle, and now you're accusing me of destroying the family for money. Your mother would be ashamed of what you're doing, he said, a final desperate jab before hanging up. I sat on my sofa, phone in hand, feeling oddly calm despite the venom in his words. The apartment that had felt like a hard-won achievement that morning now seemed small and temporary, a way station on a journey I hadn't known I was taking. "You okay?" David asked, sitting beside me. "Not really," I admitted, "but I think I will be. Grandpa trusted me with this responsibility for a reason. I need to honor that trust regardless of what Dad and Amanda think." That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with everything I had learned. When I did sleep, I dreamed of Grandpa in his study, nodding approvingly as I sorted through papers on his desk. "Value what matters, Stella," he said in the dream. "The rest is just noise." I woke at dawn with a strange mixture of grief and resolve. The world I had known was gone, but perhaps the one taking shape before me would finally bring the balance and justice Grandpa had sought. The weeks following the will reading unfolded like scenes from a movie I never expected to be cast in. Dad wasted no time filing a legal challenge to the will, hiring Preston Blackwell, one of Boston's most aggressive estate attorneys. 3 days after our phone conversation, I was served with formal papers contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. Mr. Wilson had anticipated this move. "We'll respond appropriately," he assured me when I called him in a panic. Harold prepared extensively for this possibility. All medical evaluations confirm his mental acuity until the end. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, the temporary controls of Grandpa's assets remained with his estate, though major decisions required my approval as the named trustee. I took a leave of absence from the museum to focus on understanding the estate. David helped me transform my small dining area into a makeshift office with files and documents spread across the table. Each day brought new revelations about the extent of Grandpa's holdings: commercial real estate across New England, minority stakes in several tech companies, art collections stored in climate-controlled facilities, and investment portfolios diversified across multiple sectors. How did he manage all this while living so simply? I wondered aloud as David and I sorted through property deeds one evening. "From what you've told me about him, it sounds like he valued stewardship over ownership," David replied. "He didn't need to flaunt his wealth to feel its worth." 2 weeks after the will reading, I received an unexpected text from Amanda. "We need to talk. Alone. Coffee tomorrow." Against David's cautious advice, I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe downtown. I arrived early, choosing a table in a quiet corner where we could speak privately. Amanda walked in wearing sunglasses, despite the cloudy day, removing them to reveal eyes red from crying, or lack of sleep, or both. Gone was the polished, confident sister who had sneered at me in the attorney's office. This Amanda looked frayed around the edges, her designer clothes slightly rumpled, her usual perfect makeup applied hastily. "You look terrible," I said without thinking. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Wouldn't you if your entire life had been turned upside down?" The waitress brought us coffee, and Amanda waited until she left before leaning forward. "Stella, we need to fix this situation. It's tearing the family apart." "The family was never whole to begin with, Amanda," I replied quietly. "That's what this is all about." She waved her hand dismissively. "Grandpa was confused. He misunderstood things. Daddy was just trying to provide for both of us in different ways. You needed to learn independence while I needed different kinds of support." "Did you know," I asked directly, "about Mom's trust fund, that Dad was using my share to fund your lifestyle?" Amanda's eyes darted away, then back. "Not the specifics. I knew Mom left something for us, but Daddy handled all the financial matters. He said you weren't interested in that side of things." "He never gave me the choice," I said. "He never even told me the trust existed." Amanda fidgeted with her coffee cup. "Look, what's done is done. We can't change the past, but we can move forward as sisters. We used to be close when we were little, remember, before Mom died." Her sudden invocation of sisterly bonds struck me as transparently tactical. "What exactly are you proposing, Amanda?" Her expression brightened slightly, sensing an opening. "We drop all this legal nonsense. You agree to split everything equally between us the way Grandpa would have wanted if he hadn't been confused. We go back to being a family." "That's not what Grandpa wanted," I said firmly. "He was very clear both in his will and in the personal letters he left me. This wasn't confusion or manipulation. This was his considered judgment after years of watching how Dad treated us differently." Amanda's facade of sisterly reconciliation cracked. "So that's it. You're just going to take everything. Do you know what this is doing to Daddy? His business associates are already whispering about the lawsuit questioning his financial judgment. He's losing clients." This was news to me. "Dad's having business troubles." She nodded miserably. He had been counting on Grandpa's estate to shore up some investment losses. The market hasn't been kind to his portfolio lately. The pieces suddenly fit together. Dad's aggressive response wasn't just about control or pride. He had been financially depending on an inheritance he assumed would come to him. "I'm sorry Dad is having difficulties," I said carefully. "But that doesn't change what happened with Mom's trust or Grandpa's wishes." Amanda's expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Stella. You think you can just step into managing all these assets. You restore old paintings for a living. You're way out of your depth." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But Grandpa believed I could learn. He trusted me to try." As Amanda gathered her things to leave, her parting shot was delivered with cold precision. "When this all comes crashing down, don't expect any of us to be there to catch you." Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in understanding Grandpa's estate. Mr. Wilson connected me with financial advisors and property managers who had worked with Grandpa for years. I discovered that Grandpa had anticipated my learning curve, leaving detailed notes and instructions for the transition period. Through conversations with these advisors, I began piecing together more of the family history. Mom's death had not been the beginning of Dad's financial improprieties, merely an acceleration point. He had been making questionable investment decisions for years, sometimes dipping into family funds to cover personal losses. Meanwhile, the contents of Grandpa's safe deposit box continued to provide insights. One letter detailed how he had first discovered Dad's financial decisions regarding Mom's trust, leading him to quietly establish a separate educational fund for me that had helped cover my graduate studies without Dad's knowledge. The most stunning revelation came when I finally visited the family's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, who had retired 2 years earlier. Over tea in her modest apartment, she confirmed what Grandpa had suspected. "Your father always favored Amanda, even when your mother was alive." She told me, her Irish accent still strong after decades in Boston. "Grace tried to balance things to give you special attention, but after she passed," she shook her head sadly, "Richard became almost obsessive about protecting Amanda. It was as if he poured all his grief into making sure she never experienced hardship. Meanwhile, you were expected to be the strong one." "Did you know about the trust my mother left?" I asked. Mrs. Sullivan nodded slowly. "Grace told me about it before she passed. She was very clear that it was meant equally for both her girls. When I saw how things developed afterward, with Amanda getting everything and you working so hard for every opportunity, I spoke to your grandfather about my concerns. I think that may have been what started his investigation." This conversation provided the final piece of the puzzle. The night after meeting with Mrs. Sullivan, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by Grandpa's letters, financial documents, and my own memories. The emotional weight of everything I had discovered pressed down on me. Was the inheritance worth the complete fracturing of what remained of my family? David found me there when he came over with dinner. "You look exhausted," he said, clearing space on the coffee table for the takeout containers. "I've been thinking about what all this is costing," I admitted. "Not financially, but emotionally. Dad and Amanda hate me now. The family is torn apart." David sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "The family was already broken, Stella. Your grandfather saw that clearly. He didn't create this situation. He simply stopped enabling it." "But now I'm the villain in their story," I said. "The manipulative daughter who stole what should have been theirs." "That's their narrative, not the truth," David replied. "And sometimes standing in your truth means accepting that others will create false narratives about you. The question is, what story are you going to live by?" His words echoed something Grandpa had written in one of his letters. "The most difficult decisions are rarely between right and wrong, but between different kinds of right. Standing firm in your worth may feel wrong when it causes conflict, but compromising your integrity to keep a false peace is the greater wrong." The next day we received notice that the court date for the preliminary hearing had been set. As the day approached, Amanda made one last desperate attempt to sway me through our childhood friend Jennifer, who called out of the blue. "Amanda's really struggling, Stella," Jennifer said awkwardly. "She said she might have to move out of her condo if the stipend in the trust isn't enough to cover her expenses. She's never had to budget before." "The stipend is generous," I replied. more than many people make in salary. She just needs to adjust her expectations and perhaps find meaningful employment. She also mentioned your dad might be in financial trouble. Jennifer continued, clearly uncomfortable with her messenger role. Something about loans using expected inheritance as collateral. This confirmed what I had suspected. Dad had been making financial decisions based on assets he didn't yet possess, a continuation of the poor judgment he'd shown throughout his career. I appreciate your concern, Jennifer, I said firmly, but this situation is more complicated than Amanda has led you to believe. The day before the court hearing, I made a difficult decision. After consulting with Mr. Wilson, I sent formal communication to Dad and Amanda's attorney with a final settlement offer. I would maintain trusteeship as Grandpa intended, but would establish a reasonable additional allowance for Dad to prevent any immediate financial hardship. In exchange, they would drop all legal challenges and acknowledge the validity of Grandpa's will. The response came swiftly, a flat rejection, accompanied by a counter-demand for equal division of all assets and shared control of the trust. It was exactly what I had expected, but needed to confirm before proceeding. The courtroom the next morning was intimidating with its dark wood panels and formal atmosphere. Dad and Amanda sat with their attorney on one side, not making eye contact as I entered with Mr. Wilson and his associates. For 3 hours, their attorney presented arguments about Grandpa's alleged diminished capacity and my supposed manipulation. Then Mr. Wilson methodically dismantled each claim, presenting medical evaluations, witness statements, and most damaging of all, the documentation of Dad's mishandling of Mom's trust. The judge listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When all arguments had been presented, she delivered her ruling without hesitation. The will stands as written. There is no compelling evidence of either diminished capacity or undue influence. Furthermore, the documentation regarding the prior trust raises serious concerns that I am referring to the Bar Association for review. It was a complete victory, but it felt hollow as I watched Dad's face drain of color. Amanda rushed from the courtroom in tears, not looking back when I called her name. Outside on the courthouse steps, several financial news reporters had gathered, alerted to the case involving the Harper family assets. Dad pushed past them without comment, but their questions followed me. Ms. Harper, will you be taking over your father's business interests? Is it true your grandfather disinherited your father due to financial improprieties? Mr. Wilson expertly guided me through the crowd with a firm, no comments at this time, but the damage was done. By evening, the story had spread through Boston's financial circles. Dad's business reputation, already fragile according to Amanda, would likely suffer further from the public airing of his financial misconduct. As I returned to my apartment that evening, victorious in court but emotionally drained, I made a decision that would shape the next chapter of my life. I would honor Grandpa's trust in me by managing his legacy with integrity, but I would also find a way forward that might eventually allow for healing within our broken family, even if that reconciliation seemed impossible in the moment. What I didn't realize then was that the hardest part of my journey wasn't winning the legal battle, but finding a way to preserve my own heart through the aftermath. The coming months would test everything Grandpa had taught me about value integrity and the true meaning of family. 6 months after the court's decision, I stood in the garden behind what was now my home, the Harper family estate, where generations of my family had lived. The autumn leaves created a tapestry of gold and crimson across the carefully maintained grounds, and for a moment I could almost feel Grandpa's presence beside me, nodding in approval. The transition to my new role as trustee of the Harper family assets had been challenging but illuminating. I had assembled a team of advisors, some who had worked with Grandpa for years, and others who brought fresh perspectives to the management of the diverse portfolio. Under their guidance, I was learning quickly, applying the same methodical attention to detail that had served me well in art conservation. One of my first major decisions had been establishing the Harold Harper Foundation for Arts Preservation, dedicated to supporting conservation efforts for historical and cultural artifacts. The foundation reflected Grandpa's values and my own passion, creating something meaningful from the inheritance he had entrusted to me. Despite my significantly changed financial circumstances, I maintained a relatively modest lifestyle. I had moved into the family estate primarily to preserve Grandpa's collections and to better manage the trust's affairs, but my personal expenses remained controlled. I continued to find joy in the simple pleasures Grandpa and I had shared: books, art, and quiet moments of contemplation. David had been my rock throughout this transformation. He understood my need to remain grounded amidst such dramatic changes and supported my decisions without trying to influence them. 3 months after I moved into the estate, he had proposed to me in this very garden, kneeling beside the bench where Grandpa used to sit and read on summer afternoons. News of my father and sister came to me indirectly through business associates or family friends. Dad had been forced to downsize his investment firm significantly after several clients withdrew their accounts following the publicity surrounding the will contest. He had sold his luxury condo and moved to a smaller house in the suburbs, a dramatic change from the lavish lifestyle he had maintained for decades. Amanda, faced with the reality of her reduced circumstances, had initially floundered. Her friends from the social circuit gradually disappeared when she could no longer host extravagant parties or join expensive vacations. Eventually, necessity forced her to accept an entry-level position at a fashion magazine where her natural eye for style had actually begun to earn her legitimate recognition. According to mutual acquaintances, it was the first time she had experienced the satisfaction of earning her own achievements. On a crisp October morning, while sorting through some of Grandpa's personal effects in his study, I discovered a leather-bound journal I hadn't seen before. It was tucked behind a row of first-edition Dickens novels on a high shelf, as if deliberately placed to be found by someone who shared his love of literature. Opening the journal, I recognized Grandpa's distinctive handwriting immediately. The first page bore an inscription, "For Stella, when the time is right." The journal contained Grandpa's private reflections spanning the last decade of his life. Some entries discussed his investment strategies or thoughts on world events, but many focused on family dynamics and his growing concerns about the imbalance between his granddaughters. "Watched Richard dismiss Stella's scholarship news today," one entry read. "The girl achieved something remarkable through her own merit, yet he barely looked up from his paper." Minutes later, he lavished praise on Amanda for a mundane social engagement. "The contrast breaks my heart." Another entry, dated shortly after he began his investigation into Mom's trust, was particularly poignant. "Confirmed my suspicions today. Richard has betrayed Grace's intentions entirely. My anger is tempered only by concern about how to right this wrong without causing further damage. Stella has grown strong despite the neglect, perhaps even because of it. Amanda has been weakened by excessive indulgence. How do I help them both?" As I read through the journal, I came to understand that Grandpa's decision about his will hadn't been about punishment or even justice in a simple sense. It had been a carefully considered attempt to correct a family system that was harming everyone involved, including Dad and Amanda themselves. One of the final entries, written just weeks before his death, brought tears to my eyes. "I worry for Stella after I'm gone. The path I've set her on will not be easy. Richard and Amanda will see only what they've lost, not understanding that their greatest loss has been years of authentic relationship with a remarkable young woman. My hope is that time and distance will eventually allow them to see clearly what I've seen all along, that true family wealth lies not in financial assets, but in mutual respect and genuine love. Stella has the strength to weather the coming storm. I pray that when it passes, reconciliation might be possible." Inspired by Grandpa's words, I made a decision that surprised even David. I drafted a letter to Amanda offering a genuine opportunity for reconciliation. I acknowledged the pain the inheritance situation had caused her and explained that while I intended to honor Grandpa's wishes regarding the trust structure, I was open to rebuilding our relationship as sisters, independent of financial matters. "The stipend from the trust will continue regardless," I wrote, "but what I'm offering is something different, a chance to know each other as adults, without the dynamics that shaped our childhood. I miss the sister I once had, before money and favoritism came between us." 2 weeks passed with no response. I had nearly given up hope when my phone rang one evening with Amanda's number on the screen. "I got your letter," she said without preamble, her voice tight with emotion. "I meant every word," I replied, bracing myself for rejection. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about Grandpa lately, about how he always tried to talk to me about books and art, but I was too busy shopping or planning parties to pay attention. He loved you, Amanda. That never changed. But he was right about me," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I never learned to stand on my own. These past months have been illuminating. Terrifying sometimes, but illuminating." We agreed to meet for coffee the following week, a tentative first step toward a new kind of relationship. I harbored no illusions that one conversation would heal decades of complex family dynamics, but it was a beginning. Dad remained resistant to any contact, returning my letters unopened. Mr. Wilson informed me that he had moved to Florida, presumably to make a fresh start away from the whispers in Boston's financial community. I continued to ensure that the modest pension Grandpa had established for him was maintained, leaving the door open for eventual communication when he was ready. As I settled into my role as steward of the Harper family legacy, I found myself establishing new traditions while honoring old ones. I hosted small gatherings of artists and scholars in the home that had once intimidated me, creating the warm, intellectually engaging atmosphere that Grandpa would have loved. I established a scholarship fund for students from single-parent households, thinking of how my own path might have been easier with such support. The journey had transformed me in ways I never expected. The wealth itself meant less to me than the responsibility it represented and the values it could promote when managed with integrity. I thought often of what Grandpa had told me years ago. True wealth is in understanding the value of things, not just their price. On the anniversary of Grandpa's passing, I visited his grave alone, placing a single white rose beside his headstone. "I'm trying to get it right, Grandpa," I whispered, "to balance justice with compassion, just as you taught me." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and for a moment I felt a profound sense of peace. The inheritance Grandpa had left me was far more than money or property. It was the understanding that family wounds can become wisdom when truth is finally allowed to prevail. It was the knowledge that breaking cycles of favoritism and manipulation creates freedom not just for the overlooked child, but ultimately for everyone involved. As I walked back to the car where David waited, I felt Grandpa's presence in the values he had instilled in me, values that would guide me through whatever challenges lay ahead. The most valuable inheritance wasn't in any bank account or property deed. It was the integrity he had modeled and the courage to stand firmly in my worth, even when doing so disrupted the familiar patterns of a lifetime. Have you ever experienced favoritism in your family or witnessed it among people close to you? I'd love to hear how you handled that situation and what you learned from it. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you in any way, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to hear more authentic stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most painful family truths can lead to the most profound healing when faced with courage and compassion.